Chapter 6. Drowning people sometimes die fighting their rescuers. Earthseed, The Books of the Living, Saturday, March 8th, 2025. Joanne told. She told her mother, who told her father, who told my father, who had one of those serious talks with me. Damn her. Damn her. I saw her today at the service we had for Amy and yesterday at school. She didn't say a word about what she had done. It turns out she told her mother on Thursday. Maybe it was supposed to be a secret between them or something. But oh, Phillida Garfield was so concerned for me, so worried. And she didn't like my scaring Joanne. Was Joanne scared? Not scared enough to use her brain, it seems. Joanne always seemed so sensible. Did she think getting me into trouble would make the danger go away? No, that's not it. This is just more denial. A dumb little game of if we don't talk about bad things, maybe they won't happen. Idiot. I'll never be able to tell her anything important again. What if I'd been more open? What if I talked religion with her? I'd wanted to. How will I ever be able to talk to anyone about that? What I did say worked its way back to me tonight. Mr. Garfield talked to Dad after the funeral. It was like the whispering game that little kids play. The message went all the way from, we're in danger here and we're going to have to work hard to save ourselves, to, Lauren is talking about running away because she's afraid that outsiders are going to riot and tear down the walls and kill us all. Well, I had said some of that, and Joanne had made it clear that she didn't agree with me. But I hadn't just let the bad predictions stand alone. We're going to die, boo-hoo. What would be the point of that? Still, only the negative stuff came home to me. Lauren, what did you say to Joanne? My father demanded. He came to my room after dinner when he should have been doing his final work on tomorrow's sermon. He sat down on my one chair and stared at me in a way that meant, where is your mind, girl? What's the matter with you? That look plus Joanne's name told me what had happened and what this was about. My friend Joanne. Damn her. I sat on my bed and looked back at him. I told her we were in for some bad, dangerous times, I said. I warned her we ought to learn what we could now so we could survive. That was when he told me how upset Joanne's mother was, how upset Joanne was, and how they both thought I needed to talk to someone because I thought our world was coming to an end. Do you think our world is coming to an end? Dad asked. And with no warning at all, I almost started crying. I had all I could do to hold it back. What I thought was, no, I think your world is coming to an end, and maybe you with it. That was terrible. I hadn't thought about it in such a personal way before. I turned and looked out a window until I felt calmer. When I faced him again, I said, yes, don't you? He frowned. I don't think he expected me to say that. You're 15, he said. You don't really understand what's going on here. The problems we have now have been building since long before you were born. I know. He was still frowning. I wondered what he wanted me to say. What were you doing then? He asked. Why did you say those things to Joanne? I decided to go on telling the truth for as long as I could. I hate to lie to him. What I said was true, I insisted. You don't have to say everything you think you know, he said. Haven't you figured that out yet? Joanne and I were friends, I said. I thought I could talk to her. He shook his head. These things frighten people. It's best not to talk about them. But Dad, that's like ignoring a fire in the living room because we're all in the kitchen. And besides, house fires are too scary to talk about. Don't warn Joanne or any of your other friends, he said. Not now. I know you think you're right, but you're not doing anyone any good. You're just panicking people. I managed to suppress a surge of anger by shifting the subject a little. Sometimes the way to move Dad is to go at him from several directions. Did Mr. Garfield give you back your book? I asked. What book? I loaned Joanne a book about California plants and the ways Indians used them. It was one of your books. I'm sorry I loaned it to her. It's so neutral. I didn't think it could cause trouble, but I guess it has. He looked startled, then he almost smiled. Yes, I will have to have that one back, all right. You wouldn't have the acorn bread you like so much without that one, not to mention a few other things we take for granted. Acorn bread? He nodded. Most of the people in this country don't eat acorns, you know. They have no tradition of eating them. They don't know how to prepare them, and for some reason, they find the idea of eating them disgusting. Some of our neighbors wanted to cut down all of our big live oak trees and plant something useful. You wouldn't believe the time I had changing their minds. What did people eat before? Bread made of wheat and other grains, corn, rye, oats, things like that. Too expensive. Didn't used to be. You get that book back from Joanne. He drew a deep breath. Now, let's get off the sidetrack and back onto the main track. What were you planning? Did you try to talk Joanne into running away? Then I sighed. Of course not. Her father says you did. He's wrong. This was about staying alive, learning to live outside so that we'd be able to if we ever had to. He watched me as though he could read the truth in my mind. When I was little, I used to think he could. All right, he said. You may have meant well, but no more scare talk. It wasn't scare talk. We do need to learn what we can while there's time. That's not up to you, Lauren. You don't make decisions for this community. Oh hell, if I could just find a balance between holding back too much and poaching. Yes, sir. He leaned back and looked at me. Tell me exactly what you told Joanne. All of it. I told him. I was careful to keep my voice flat and passionless, but I didn't leave anything out. I wanted him to know, to understand what I believed. The non-religious part of it, anyway. When I finished, I stopped and waited. He seemed to expect me to say more. He just sat there for a while and stared at me. I couldn't tell what he felt. Other people never could if he didn't want them to, but I've been able to most of the time. Now I felt shut out, and there was nothing I could do about it. I waited. At last he let his breath out as though he had been holding it. Don't talk about this anymore, he said in a voice that didn't invite argument. I looked back at him, not wanting to give a promise that would be a lie. Lauren, Dad, I want your promise that you won't talk about this anymore. What to say? I wouldn't promise. I couldn't. We could make earthquake packs, I suggested. Emergency kits that we can grab in case we have to get out of the house fast. If we call them earthquake packs, the idea might not bother people so much. People are used to worrying about earthquakes. All this came out in a rush. I want your promise, daughter. I slumped. Why? You know I'm right. Even Mrs. Garfield must know it. So why? I thought he would yell at me or punish me. His voice had that warning edge to it that my brothers and I had come to call the rattle, as in a rattlesnake's warning sound. If you pushed him past the rattle, you were in trouble. If he called you son or daughter, you were close to trouble. Why? I insisted. Because you don't have any idea what you're doing, he said. He frowned and rubbed his forehead. When he spoke again, the edge went out of his voice. It's better to teach people than to scare them, Lauren. If you scare them and nothing happens, they lose their fear, and you lose some of your authority with them. It's harder to scare them a second time, harder to teach them, harder to win back their trust. Best to begin by teaching. His mouth crooked into a little smile. It's interesting that you chose to begin your efforts with the book you lent to Joanne. Did you ever think of teaching from that book? Teaching my kindergarteners? Why not? Get them started on the right foot. You could even put together a class for older kids and adults. Something like Mr. Ibarra's wood carving class, Mrs. Balter's needlework class, and young Robert Shu's astronomy lectures. People are bored. They wouldn't mind another informal class now that they've lost the Yannis television. If you can think of ways to entertain them and teach them at the same time, you'll get your information out, and all without making anyone look down. Look down? Into the abyss, daughter. But I wasn't in trouble anymore. Not at the moment. You've just noticed the abyss, he continued. The adults in this community have been balancing at the edge of it for more years than you've been alive. I got up, went over to him, and took his hand. It's getting worse, Dad. I know. Maybe it's time to look down. Time to look for some hand and footholds before we get pushed in. That's why we have target practice every week and laser wire and our emergency bell. Your idea for emergency packs is a good one. Some people already have them. For earthquakes. Some will assemble them if I suggest it, and of course, some won't do anything at all. There are always people who won't do anything. Will you suggest it? Yes, at the next neighborhood association meeting. What else can we do? None of this is fast enough. It will have to be. He stood up, a tall, broad wall of a man. Why don't you ask around, see if anyone in the neighborhood knows anything about martial arts? You need more than a book or two to learn good, dependable, unarmed combat. I blinked. Okay. Check with old Mr. Shu and Mr. and Mrs. Montoya. Mr. and Mrs.? I think so. Talk to them about classes, not about Armageddon. I looked up at him, and he looked more like a wall than ever, standing and waiting. And he had offered me a lot, all I could get, I suspected. I sighed. Okay, Dad, I promise. I'll try not to scare anyone else. I just hope things hold together long enough for us to do it your way. And he echoed my sigh. At last. Good. Now come out back with me. There are some important things buried in the yard in sealed containers. It's time for you to know where they are, just in case.